All right, welcome to another edition of my motivational message, and this week you can see our topic is going to be perception. I believe I first was introduced to this picture back when I was in art class back in high school, and these kind of pictures always fascinated me. And so when you look at the picture, I think when I poll my students, the one that they see the most is this young woman whose head is turned away to the right, looking over her shoulder. But very few, unless we give them a little coaching, will see the old woman with her chin tucked into her coat and with her lips down below her coat line and then a wart on her nose. And I don't know if you can see the old woman, but it just has to do with perception, or what do you perceive from the picture. It could be a young woman, it could be an old woman. I had a lesson in perception many years ago. I was asked to lead a leadership group for an organization that works up in Canada, and it uses the wilderness as a laboratory. And I was pretty young. I had, and I would say that my style at the time was very regimental. I had been in the Marine Corps for 6 years by that time, and I was all about everybody being on the same page, and everybody does A, B, C, and D, and everybody does it together. I was very much into that regimented leadership style. And so when I got out into the woods with this group, it's like, hey, we all wake up at the same time, we all eat breakfast at the same time, we all pack up at the same time, we all get out in our canoes at the same time, and that was just kind of the way that I was. However, on this particular trip, there was a man by the name of Bill who always seemed to do Z when I said, hey, let's do A, and he seemed to do K when I said, hey, let's do B. And I was really frustrated. I mean, it really frustrated me that Bill just did not fall in line with what I wanted everybody to do. And I began to build a perception of him. I began to think that he didn't like the program. I began to think that he was rebellious. I began to think that he wasn't interested or thought he knew better than everybody else. And so based on this perception, I just wanted to kind of cast Bill aside and forget about it. But the second day in, my mentor on that trip pulled me aside and just basically asked, hey, how do you think things are going? And I'm like, hey, everything's going great except for Bill. Bill doesn't seem to be with the program. And I shared with my mentor there my perceptions of Bill, and he's like, well, have you talked to Bill? And I'm like, no. So he sat down and kind of explained to me how I could have a conversation with Bill that was non-threatening to Bill, but also was very informative to myself. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is good stuff, but I'm not going to be talking to Bill. Bill's just not, he's just not with the program. And so the next morning when we got up, I was organizing canoe groups. I was kind of mixing things up, and all I knew was I'm not going to paddle with Bill. And so as I'm pairing everybody up, I get to the end, and then I realize that just Bill and I are left. And so I was going to spend the day in the canoe with Bill. So, I get in that canoe, and I'm pretty determined not to have this conversation. But after an hour or so, it's kind of like, he's going along thinking everything is dandy, and I'm going along thinking everything is junk. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. So we're walking down this portage, and I'm like, hey, Bill. And he's like, what's Chris? Great day, isn't it? I'm like, yeah. And so I kind of explained to him, I said, hey, when I get everybody up and we're going to have breakfast, it seems like you're, still in the tent messing with your stuff. And, when we go to pack up, you're over brushing your teeth. And when we're going to do this, you're getting water. And it's just like, I just curious why you don't feel like you need to be a part of everything. And he's like, oh, I never knew that really bothered you. And then he went on to explain how he's hiked the Appalachian Trail 5 times. He's been in Colorado. He's been to all these different places backpacking. And he says, I've just really developed a routine that works for me. And he goes, I didn't think it was a big deal as long as I was ready to go when everybody else was ready to go. And sure enough, Bill was always ready to go. We never waited for Bill. But it dawned on me that at that moment that Bill had a reason for why he did things the way he did, and it was an acceptable reason. And I had been living on the perception that he didn't like what we were doing, things like that. But in reality, he was very much into what we were doing. He enjoyed it, and I also found out there was a lot because of his knowledge base that I could learn from him. And I came back home with that experience, and I began to realize as I looked around at some relationships that a lot of my relationships were just built on perceptions. That they were just built off of just what I observed in people and not what I knew about people. And I began to realize that living life based on perception is not reality. Living life based on perception is not reality. And that's my challenge to you today. Look through all of your relationships and look how you interact with people. Is it always based on perception? And it's really hard because we look at a person, we see how they're dressed, we see how they walk, we see how they talk, we look at what their interests are and things like that. We just build a perception just based on observation. But do we ever get in and start asking them questions? Do we ever get in and start talking with them and have a conversation and get to know them so that our perceptions can be transformed into reality, so then when we do interact with them, when we do share words with them, it's actions and words that are informed. We're actually living in a reality where I'm treating you in an appropriate way based on who you really are and not what I think you are. And I think that's a danger for all of us, is just treating people based on what we think they are and not what they really are. And sometimes our perceptions are right, but we need to inform our perceptions to know for sure. One danger that I'm going to toss in there with what I'm talking about today, and that is the fact that we all do try to create perceptions ourselves. We do try to put on a front, whether by how we dress or how we act or whatever, to get people to think certain things of us. And so a lot of times it does create a lot of confusion when we're trying to create perceptions and we're trying to live and wade our way through all these perceptions. But the challenge that I want to leave everybody with is not to live life based on perceptions, but live life based on knowledge, and that can only happen through a conversation and asking questions and getting to know people. So live life informed and live life in reality and not based on perception. Well, I trust that was a challenge to you. I know it's been a challenge for me. It's something that I think about constantly and have to constantly work at. So I hope that's something that you start working on today. Hopefully we'll see you back next week. But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click like, make a comment, share this with some others, and hopefully you'll keep listening. Thank you very much.